Hey, welcome to video number 4 in this tutorial series about the ZBrush Face Tools plugin and Character Creator 4. In this video, we're going to concentrate on the textures or the albedo, and I'm going to show you how to create a very nice and detailed texture within ZBrush using Polypaint and send it to Character Creator 4 in the form of a high-res map or a high-res texture map that you can apply to your character. Let's go ahead and jump straight into it. Alright, so a quick recap on where we left off from the previous video. This is our character already with all the details and everything else that we created as a normal map. So all of these details come from ZBrush. And let me just show you the ZBrush version. So this is the detailed version of the model, and I just went ahead and send those details into Character Creator 4 and automatically created this normal map that is, providing all those crevices and all those nice bumps and pores. Now, the next thing that I want to do is kind of like stylize the texture or the base texture a little bit more, or in other words, just tweak it a little bit so that it looks more intentional in a way, and it sort of like departs from that more generic Kevin character that we started with. So I'm going to show you how to do that using Polypaint, but you can literally do anything that you want. So let's go ahead and jump back into ZBrush. And what I'm going to do is enable the diffuse. So I'm going to click on diffuse. And as you can see, what the diffuse switch does is literally enable the texture map that comes with Character Creator 4 into our character. So what you see here is literally the same thing that you see here, obviously with different lighting, different shading. In fact, let's go ahead and change the material because right now we have the base material. So I'm going to switch to the Skin Shade 4 that comes with ZBrush, so you can visualize things a little bit better. And that's it. Like, we now have a texture map. We can go ahead and check the texture map subpalette here, and as you can see, that's pretty much it, right? That's what this switch does. Like I've mentioned in previous videos, this is a very convenient plugin, but ultimately what it's doing is turning on and off different things that you can do manually in ZBrush. So it's the same thing as just doing that, right? So that's it. We have the texture now in ZBrush, but if I start like painting or adding color right now, you won't be able to see it because the texture map is on, and that will basically override whatever Polypaint you have. So if I turn this off, we don't have any Polypaint, and the main thing that we need to do is transfer this texture as a Polypaint. So in this stage of the process where we're going to concentrate just in the texture of our character, the step number 1 in this part of the process is to convert this map into Polypaint, and that's something very, very simple to do. So what I'm going to do is click on Polypaint. And by the way, if I open up my geometry palette, you'll see I'm also in subdivision level number 7. So I have plenty of resolution to project, let's say, all this color and this map into Polypaint. So make sure that you are in the 7th subdivision level. And from the Polypaint palette, you'll see we have this Polypaint from texture. So we will be able to transfer this texture into Polypaint. Now, in order to do that, if I just go ahead and click it right now, you'll get this pop-up saying that mRGB draw mode is off. So you need to adjust that and retry. So that just means that in the switch here at the top, we have no RGB information or material and RGB information. So I'm going to click on mRGB just to enable it. And that basically solves that issue. So without enabling this, we're basically projecting nothing. We're not projecting any color or material. And in this case that I have enabled the mRGB, or in other words, the material red, green, and blue channels, I will be able to project everything. So I'm going to click on project or create Polypaint from texture, which is kind of like what I'm talking about, the projection. And you see, we now have exactly the same thing, but now the texture is not on. So this is literally Polypaint. Now that we have the Polypaint, we can just go ahead and start working and concentrating on the texture and the albedo. And one thing that I like to do when I'm working with textures and Polypaint is to switch between this shade mode or material mode and a shadeless version. So let's go ahead and open up the render palette, and I'm going to go ahead and drop this to the right hand side. And the only reason I want to have this on the right hand side is to click on this flat view, and I can switch between flat and preview. So preview is what we have here by default, and flat is just going to give you a shadeless version of the model. So in other words, this is just pure color, so there's no influence of the material. So this is pretty important when you texture in your character. All right, so the first thing I want to do is create some kind of like unification of the colors a little bit and kind of like override some of the details that came with the original texture. So let's go ahead and go back to preview. And let's go ahead and modify some of the brushes that we can use, or the tools that we can use to paint. So using the standard brush, I'm going to go ahead and enable RGB. So it's only going to affect the color, not the material. And I'm going to switch the stroke type to color spray. And I'm also going to change this alpha to alpha 08. So very simple stuff. Now let's go ahead and click on the color picker, and let's drag to select a color. This is how you can pick a color in ZBrush, or one of the ways of doing that. So I'm going to select something around there. which is kind of like a yellowish tone. And I'm going to push it to something lighter. So I'm just going to go like this and maybe slightly to the yellow color. And also, I'm going to enable symmetry here and increase my brush size. And also, if I just go ahead and start painting, it's going to be pretty intense. So I'm going to make sure that the RGB intensity is set down to 18. We're going to change things. It's going to be very subtle, so 18 should be okay. Another thing I want to do is in the stroke palette, I'm going to change the lazy mouse. So I'm going to remove lazy mouse so that it's a little bit faster to do this. And you might not see the difference. It's actually very subtle. We can increase this a tiny bit more. And I'm going to go into flat mode so that you can see really what I'm painting here. So it's really hard to see actually. Here we go. So this sort of like mole or this freckle that I have here, I'm going to go ahead and cover it just by painting. There we go. So you can see that it's actually creating a lighter pattern. But because I'm using very low intensity in the RGB and I'm also pressing softly on my tablet, this is a very subtle change, right? And this is what I want to do. I want to target the kind of like the bony areas of the head. So I'm just going to go around this sort of zygomatic arc or around the eye, the cheekbones. And you see it's a bit lighter in there. And actually I can just switch to a different color around the nose. So I'm gonna select this darker color, push it down a bit. And this is kind of like the first pass. I wanna make the entire nose a bit more reddish. And I like to add a bit of darkening here around the eyes, kind of like probably enhancing the eye bags or just making it a little bit more darker in general. So all these changes that I'm doing are super subtle. I'm kind of like exaggerating now just so that you can see the difference. Let's go ahead and darken up the lips a little bit. So let's select a color from the lips, drop this color a tiny bit more, and let's go ahead and target kind of like the inside a bit more. There we go. So you see very subtle stuff. I'm not, departing too much from the base texture. I also like to mix up other colors like the saturated blue or almost green, almost like a gray color. And I'm going to press very softly with even less RGB around the eyes. Again, that sort of idea of darkening these areas a bit more. All right, so hopefully you can see where I'm going with this, like in terms of the variation of color. But that's about it. In terms of like setting up or blocking out the texture, it's a subtle process or a subtle effect of the process, but hopefully you get the idea. It's just kind of like targeting those lighter areas around the eyes, darker zones in the eyes, and some reddish tones for the nose, and maybe a little bit more to the cheekbones. Actually, let's go ahead and select a reddish color, and I'm gonna go for a larger brush size. There we go, something like that. We can even override some of the, the mustache and all these hair follicles, so that it's not as prominent in the final texture. All right. Another thing that you can do to speed up this process is to change some of the alphas. So let's go ahead and change this to alpha. Where is it? Alpha 22. And I'm going to change the color spray stroke for the drag rect. And the drag rect is going to, click and drag and produce kind of like I'm going to increase the intensity. It's going to produce the sort of like blood vessels. So I'm going to select something a little bit darker and more towards the red tone. There we go. So this sort of like capillaries or vesting vessels. I'm gonna reduce the intensity as well. All of these changes are gonna be rather subtle, and when we switch from flat to preview, they're actually not that easy to spot, right? But that is the essence of creating a more realistic texture. All the subtleties in the skin. If you read this from the distance, you see, okay, this is just pink, maybe with a slight variation in yellow and pink and red tones. But in reality, there's so much variation when you get closer. And this is what I'm trying to achieve with this, this color and adding these sort of veins bursting. All right, this is another process, just like what we did with the detailing, that can take a while. So I just kind of like want to show you the tools and the general workflow and the general steps so you can follow along and spend as much time as you need to building up the complexity around the around the texture. Another thing you can do as well is let's switch back to color spray, and let's switch to a simpler brush or simpler alpha. Let's go for alpha 47. So this is going to just give you a set of tiny bumps. Let's actually go for a smaller brush. Let's go for 40. And I'm going to select a lighter tone, just a yellowish tone. And that is going to give you some nice bumps all around. We increase the RGB, kind of like molting. Hopefully you can see. I'm going to add them around here so you can see the difference. So this is another way to integrate that texture, just adding some of these little pieces of dust, almost those particles in the, that probably doesn't make much sense, but these very, I think about them as like dust particles of a different color. And all I'm trying to do here is to variate that that transition between the, say, the red and the yellow. We can just switch to another color and do the same thing. So it's all about generating that nice complexity of the skin while maintaining the subtleties of it, right? So that's the first step. Just go ahead and change the stroke, the alpha, and just play around with the RGB intensity as well to apply this color. So this is the first pass, right? The second pass of this process is just to enhance those details that we created with the normal or with the high frequency details, and then we convert it into the normal. So I'm gonna go ahead and scroll down to the masking palette. So the masking sub palette, sorry, this one right here. And this is fantastic because it allows you to automate the process of masking certain areas of your face. And that also allows you to create something very, very complex in virtually no time. So the first thing that I want to do is mask by cavity. So let's click on mask by cavity. And I'm going to click on mask by cavity. So this is going to look at the cavity or all those tiny pores and details that we created, as you can see, and it's going to automatically mask out. Obviously, this is very, very sharp. If I get closer, you see, it's very pixelated. So what I want to do is actually smooth out this transition between the mask and the unmasked areas. So a simple way of doing it is to go to the mask adjust. So I'm going to press Shift and click on mask adjust. And also, let's expand this profile. And you see this profile or this line right here is what is causing this to be so sharp. So it's basically no mask and then boom, 100% mask. So I want to make this a bit more subtle. Let's go ahead and reset this more linear profile, and let's go ahead and apply it. Actually, before I apply, I'm going to get close so you can see what it's going to do. Pay attention to this area right here, and I'm going to apply it so you can see. So it kind of like blurs things up a little bit. Let's go ahead and apply it again. You can apply it multiple times. You can also blur the mask, but I think the blur is going to be a little bit too intense. Yeah, blur is a little bit too intense. We can go ahead and keep applying these a few times. All right, so that looks a bit better. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to invert that mask. So right now I'm basically masking everything but the crevices or the wrinkles. And let's go ahead and turn off the mask so that we don't see it. We still have the mask, but it's not visible. So we're just turning this off. And I'm going to use a different alpha. I'm going to go back to alpha 8. And I'm going to leave the RGB as it is. And I'm going to target a dark color, almost like a full red, a bit more saturated. All right, something like that. And I'm going to apply it around this area, this region, so that you can see what it does. All right, so as you can see, what I'm painting is just those areas that I automatically mask using the mask by cavity. And I'm just adding that extra redness to the crevices and to the wrinkles. So this is what starts to create a very complex, a very complex texture just by enhancing or kind of like highlighting some of the details even more. I'll do the same thing around the nose area with those lines that I manually created. But as you can see, even though it takes time and it is more of the same, a repetitive process, you can utilize those tools that I just showed you, like the mask by cavity, and I'll show you a couple more in just a second, to speed up the workflow a bit more and get something that looks pretty cool in relatively no time. And the idea with this redness is that it will enhance the look. If I just switch back, actually, so you can see it to preview, when we have the material and we have the speculars and all of that, it will sort of enhance those details and make them a little bit more, make them pop a bit more. Let's go ahead and do another one or another masking tool. So I'm going to use Let's go back to flat. I tend to use flat mode for the most part when I'm building a complex texture like this, so that I can really see the difference between the values and the hues. So let's go back in here, and I'm going to click on peaks and valleys, and I'm going to click on mask by peaks and valleys. So this is going to look at the peaks and the valleys of the mesh. Right now, because we have, subdivision level 7, we have lots of different variations. But again, we can just go ahead with this simple thing, or this simple pattern that was generated. We can also apply the adjustment. We can also go down in subdivision levels if you wanted to. And that allows us to blur this or apply the adjustment even faster. So you see it is happening faster. This one I'm going to blur it quite a bit. There we go. And let's go back to the highest subdivision level so that we can apply those changes to the highest subdivision level. And what I want to do with this, as you can see, the peaks and valleys almost targets the areas that I want to maintain kind of like dark or with a reddish tone. I'm going to go ahead and invert it like so. I want to hide the mask, and instead of paint, which you can totally do, you can just go ahead and start painting. And as you can see, I'm just adding a little bit of redness to that area. So that might be cool. Instead of doing that, I'm just going to adjust the entire texture and the entire hues or values of this texture. So to do that, let's go to the Polypaint. This is another really cool trick. Let's go to, not Polygroup, sorry, Polypaint. Here we go. And I'm going to click on Adjust Color. So the Adjust Color is going to allow me to bring in this new palette or this pop-up window. And I will be able to adjust all of these things on the fly. It's kind of like your color balance in Photoshop and your hue saturation. So I'm going to hide the mask by clicking on this icon right here. So this is what I see. I can also hide the materials so that we have pretty much what we have in the viewport, right? And like I said, instead of painting the whole thing, I'm just going to change or alter the values of just this area that I don't have or that I have on mask. So I'm going to take the RGB intensity. I'm going to drop it down. So you see, I'm just changing the hues or the values. More than the hues, the actual values. And I'm going to add a little bit of contrast with the red channel. Maybe that's too much. Red intensity or the RGB intensity. So I'm going to push the red colors a bit more. Maybe add a bit of variation here with the green. Drop the blues, or maybe increase the blues actually. So you can just go crazy with these things. All of the things that I'm showing you is just it's about the subtleties really. So you don't see much difference in here, but that's kind of like the idea. We're also gonna turn the intensity down a bit, so it's darkening that whole region. And I'm gonna also increase the saturation. So you can play around with all of these ideas. As you can see, it's a very subtle thing, but it sort of has this nice pattern. If I turn this back on, in these areas that I'm changing it, it's a little bit darker and a bit more saturated in terms of the color. So I'm gonna click OK. And now clear the mask, and you see we have those applied in there. So that's pretty cool. Now the other thing that you can do is use the mask by smoothness. So I'm going to click on that one. This one might take a little while just because it sort of analyzes the entire mesh for the areas that are smoother than others. It didn't take that long, but as you can see, it is kind of like masking the smoothest surface. And you can change the range. So right now, it is kind of like masking just almost the crevices, kind of like the same thing as the cavity. So I'm going to increase the range to, let's go for 78. Try it again. There we go. I think I can push this even further to 129. All right. So I think that looks a little bit better. I'm going to go ahead and also blur it. So with the, let's go back in subdivision level so we can do this a little bit faster. And click on apply a couple times. There we go. Go back to the high subdivision level. All right. And I'm going to hide the mask. And let's do the same thing that I did before with the adjust colors. Let's hide that mask, hide the material. And this time I'm just going to change the hue. So I'm going to go for a yellowish tone that has a bit more of intensity, more desaturation, and maybe add a bit of contrast as well. All right, so a lot more variation. As you can see, it's still pretty subtle. Hopefully you kind of see the difference. Let's click OK. And let's clear the mask. There we go. So there's a lot more variation and it looks a lot more interesting, I think. But you can totally do more specific things and target certain areas with different colors. But in terms of the workflow, this is pretty much what I would do to adjust a more realistic texture. I just want to show you that what I'm doing here with this with these features, with the masking features, is just generating a nice variation in pattern. I'm not looking for something specific. That's why I just keep changing the range and playing with the smoothness or the peaks and valleys. And all I'm trying to do is variate those hues very subtly, right? If you want to do kind of like an alien creature, you can totally do that with, again, you can use the adjust color, and you can just go ahead and push this, make it more like a pale character. That would be cool as well, I think. You can go for something like this, or you can just add a little bit of a tint with a green color or a blue color. You can play around with this. In fact, I'm just going to show you something else. Even though I'm going to stick with something similar to what I have before, I'm just going to show you that if you do this is kind of like a zombie type of character. You can totally do that and keep working with the different masking options to vary this even further. But the cool thing about this is that, as you can see, this is very, very different in terms of the color from what I have in CC4. But the plugin is intelligent enough that it's going to analyze the color that we change in the head with just using Polypaint, and it's going to apply that to the rest of the body, which is awesome. So let's go ahead and wrap up this video, and I'm going to show you how to transfer this Polypaint into CC4. Again, very, very easy to do. So the last step of this process of adjusting the texture and the color is simply to go to Update to CC4. And from the pop-up window, unless you change something in the details or the base mesh, all you need to do is select the Polypaint. So I'm going to turn off details. So we're going to transfer the Polypaint into the diffuse texture of CC4. Pretty straightforward. I'm going to also send it as a 4K resolution. And another cool thing that you can do is work on the Polypaint for the tongue and the eyes and the teeth as well. And if you wanted to, if you add those colors or Polypaint within ZBrush, you can totally tick these boxes and send them as well to CC4. But I'm going to work with the defaults anyway. So I'm going to click on Update to Character Creator. And the file has been successfully exported. Let's go ahead and switch to CC4. And we have a little pop-up window, which the most important thing is that we want to apply the head color to the rest of the body. And that is in the case that you are working on a full body character and you want to end up with, a workable full body character, even though we're just focusing on the face or on the head for this tutorial series. I'm going to click on Update. And there we go. Once you finish updating everything, you'll see we have a pretty cool update of the texture all over the body of the character, even though this is not what I'm going for. It could be like a nice zombie character. And all we've done is just adjust the color and the saturation from the base texture. And you see, all the nice details and subtle hints at the darker eyes and all of that came through really nice, even though, it's just a matter of texture. It sort of adds another level of depth to the character. So that's pretty much it. Like, if you want to, summarize this entire tutorial in just a couple of steps, it's just a matter of turning the diffuse switch right here, which basically turns on the texture. Then from the Polypaint palette, you click on Polypaint from texture, making sure that you have RGB or mRGB enabled, and apply that. So that turns that texture into Polypaint. Then you can go ahead and use any brush in ZBrush. You can even bring in, photos and textures to project them into the texture of your character as Polypaint. You can use all the masking features in ZBrush to variate that texture. And once you're finished with your painting, you can click on Update to Character Creator, click on the Polypaint to diffuse, and it will be updated. Now, the reason why you see this now, it's back to the sort of like skin color, is because once it's finishing sending the Polypaint, it switched back to the texture. But I can turn this off. Again, this is because I have this diffuse enabled on. So that's pretty much it. But we have already the Polypaint. Now, like I said, I'm gonna stick with a more realistic texture, I think. So I'm just gonna go ahead and load the final tweaks or the final project that I have for the textures, just to show you. There we go. So here is my character with my final textures. Again, it's kind of like following the same principle of what I showed you in this video, but I sort of maintain the more sort of like realistic skin, even though I'm pushing this towards the stylization of the character. Let's go ahead and do a quick screenshot and compare it with what we had before. So another screenshot here. So you see, in terms of the progress that we've made since we started, actually, let's bring this guy here. So this was the very first iteration of the character. You can see the progression. So this is before we tweak things in ZBrush. Then we tweak the shape. We got this kind of like stylized character. Then we added some of the the normal details and all of that. And this is where we are at the moment. So this is already with the custom normals. Obviously, I spent a bit more time doing the details and all these crevices. Again, just keep in mind that these are not expression wrinkles. These are like the neutral face wrinkles. And the more wrinkles that you add, the more the older the skin will look like, or the older the person would look like. So kind of like trying to do a middle-aged sort of character here. And yeah, this is what we have at the moment. It's a character that has all the high frequency details, all the pores and all of that. And now we have a nice updated texture using the Polypaint technique that I just showed you in this video. So I'm going to leave this video here. And in the next video in the series, we're going to finally start working on the expression of our character using the ZBrush face tools. I'll see you there.